Let's get started. And I want to welcome you. I want to welcome Doug. And I want to briefly tell you about Doug, because he won't brag about himself. But Doug is a retired investigative journalist. And he is doing a lot of important volunteer work during retirement. So he's on the board for Montagne de Luz, and last year he was president of the board. He is leading Conversation Partners, which meets on the third Tuesday evening of each month at our church, and pairs an immigrant with a member of our community who speaks English well, so that we can help immigrants learn English and learn about their new home. And Doug retired from being executive director of investigative reporters and editors. And it's called IRE. It's a nonprofit that provided training for 6,000 journalists around the world. So Doug did a lot of traveling, a lot of conferences for that. Before that, he worked at Ohio State, and he had two positions. He was assistant vice president for editorial communications, and he was director of the Kiplinger program in public affairs journalism. He's worked in lots of different newsrooms as editor and as a reporter, including for the Columbus Dispatch. He was an editor. He was an editor in Scranton. He's worked as an editor and a reporter in places like Danville, Illinois, Indianapolis, Springfield, Ohio. He earned his bachelor's from Miami University in English and political science, and his master's in journalism from Indiana University. So I'm thrilled to welcome Doug, and I know you are too. Let's welcome him.
And there will be a link at the end if anyone wants to download the presentation. There will be a link that you can do that. Any of the web URLs will be active as a PDF file because I may go through a few things a little bit more quickly, or you may want to spend a little time with some of the graphics. I wanted to begin with kind of this whole notion of why journalism and why I got into that. And thinking about this, putting it together, I thought back to high school. And our good friend George Orwell was a really big influence on me with 1984 and Animal Farm and a lot of his essays. He worked as a writer. He was on the BBC. He had a lot of different jobs. And this quote I really love. There's from 1984. There was truth and there was untruth. And if you clung to the truth, even against the whole world, you were not mad. And that strikes a little bit differently today, even in 1984 or in the late 70s when I would have read the book for the first time. But I liked his connection between words and information and power and government. So I was really also same age as Tom and Betsy, raised during an era. I remember the first person to step on the moon. I remember the Vietnam War and Watergate and Nixon's resignation and the bicentennial and all of these major events. I was like a news nerd in middle school and high school, just fascinated by all of that. So when I went to college, though, I thought I would be a lawyer. And that's one reason I went to Miami, because they had a really good kind of pre-law liberal arts background. But when I got there, I always liked writing and news. So I worked at a school newspaper and then kind of was toying with what do I really want to do. And I decided law school wasn't for me, no offense to lawyers. It just And then there was a pivotal summer in 1985. I spent that summer at a program at Georgetown University. And as part of that program, in the afternoon, we had classes in the morning, and then in the afternoon, everyone had an internship. And mine was at the Senate Press Gallery, and I had access to the House and the Senate. And my time was spent talking to journalists about how they do their jobs, watching how government really works, not what I learned in textbooks and civics classes and things like that. So it was my first time to DC, and I had before that thought, well, maybe I could even work in communications for like a congressman's office or something like that. That summer, no, it was like I saw how the sausage was made. I decided I don't want to make that sausage. I want to report on what these people are doing so that the public has a better view of what's really happening. So as Tom said, my career took two paths. The first 2/3 of my career, I worked kind of at the local level in news, in newsrooms as a reporter or an editor. This photo was taken on September 11th. And this was my editor, Ben Marison, my boss, Mary Lynn, and I'm there on the corner at my desk. Ben asked me to help coordinate coverage of 9/11 locally. So I kind of managed the newspaper's local coverage of that. We sent teams to New York and to DC after 9/11. I get kind of goosebumps remembering that. So that was the first 2/3 of my career. And the second 2/3, I spent doing training and journalism education with the Kiplinger program and with IRE. And that job, those two jobs involved a lot of travel, as Tom said. So I had the privilege of meeting journalists in their communities across platforms. People who worked in newspapers, yes, but also radio, TV, magazines, web only. So I met people working in a lot of different news organizations, and I learned about their struggles, their joys, how they were trying to really make sure they were adhering to truth and fairness and balance in their coverage. Just to give a feel, I put together a map. These are the places that I did training during that period from 2008 to 2020, roughly. So it was a lot of places, so all parts of the country. It also included some international travel and training, so it was a real privilege to meet journalists around the world and see what they were dealing with and give training, a lot of data training and public records and interviewing, those kinds of things to really try to get to truth, which is the ultimate goal. And then, Tom asked me to kind of think about how my faith shaped this journey and shaped my work a bit. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Newsrooms are not filled with a lot of Christians. So people who maybe were raised in a church, but it's very, and Margaret knows, she worked in journalism too before becoming a fiction writer. Most people in newsrooms are fairly cynical, and they're not church people typically. And Mitch maybe can speak to this as well from his work in TV. There's a lot of cursing, there's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of, it's very competitive. It can be somewhat ruthless. So I kind of stood out in ways because I didn't operate like that. I was trying to, follow the golden rule and treat people the way I wanted to be treated and be respectful and let my faith guide that work. Not just about getting the story, but about how you get the story, because the end never justifies the means in my work. So, so I think it may be a different kind of manager because I wanted to be more empathetic and more fair, I think, to my staff in different newsrooms than maybe other managers because of my Christian faith. I think wanting to recognize each person is a creation of God and reflects God's image and deserves full respect and autonomy and care along the way. So when I left the Dispatch, one of the reporters there gave me what has been one of the highest compliments I've ever received. And he said to me, "You not only made me a better journalist, you made me a better man." And I think that was part of living my Christian faith, talking openly about, being involved in our church in Pennsylvania, in Illinois. I was on session deacons, involved in lots of youth groups and things like that over the years, freely talking about that with people and sharing that experience. Again, maybe that was common where you worked, but it was not common in the newsroom, really. And I think it's not all that common in a lot of workplaces. So I tried to just be honest about who I was and what mattered to me. Part of it also was, when you're a journalist, you really have to be careful about being viewed as objective and not biased. So I could not get involved in anything that would strike anyone as political or partisan, in the sense of no yard signs for political candidates, no donations to political campaigns. There were some journalists, one of my bosses at the Dispatch, did not believe in voting in primaries, because those were, unless it was just for like a tax levy or a school levy, because his view was, if you vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, that's a partisan thing and it could affect your objectivity. I didn't agree with that. So there were differences of opinions in newsrooms on things like that. But I think my faith really did guide a lot of the work and how I approached people. And thinking about being part of the Presbyterian Church, I'm reminded that we had the 6th grade ends of the church, and now there are 3 pastors in the room. Let me explain all this. I'm good at theology.
You guys can get it, please.
Yeah, it's kind of the same vibe that we feel when someone says, "Oh, like everyone can be a citizen journalist." It requires no training. But one of the 6 grade ends of the church is the preservation of the truth. And I realized that that's something that drew me into journalism, and it kept me there and drew me into training, because I hope to be able to influence and help other journalists do a better job of getting closer to the truth, not just doing what I call tennis ball journalism. He said this, she said that, he said no, the other guy said yes. That really isn't getting close to the truth. But that's why I was kind of focused on using data and public records and finding other things to collaborate and corroborate information to try to get closer to the truth. As I thought about this in today's world, which is very different, even from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I think these are also kind of goals, aspirations, responsibilities for the church corporately, but I also think we are the church, right, as individuals. So I think we have an obligation in our sphere of influence to do what we can to preserve the truth. And these times where there's so much misinformation, so much disinformation, that means we speak truth, honestly. If someone is telling us something that we know is not correct, in a gentle way, say, where does that come from? Like, I've never heard this. What is the source of that? Like, you don't have to be a troll on social media to have a conversation and maybe just help people see that there is truth and there's misinformation out there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. In my career, every year it seemed technology kept changing and things were very rapid in the way that we did our work and the way that you as consumers of news and information get your information. I remember once, I think our kids were maybe in middle school or something, and we were reminiscing at the dinner table about the olden days when we were reporters and we didn't have the internet and we didn't have cell phones and GPS and all of this. And then our daughter looked at us kind of horrified and she's like, "How did you survive?" You could not imagine doing the job with all these tools. And it's changing even more rapidly year by year. So we went from this, and at first I was going to say, this audience, everybody in the room knows this person, but a lot of you don't. You guys have a clue of who this is? He said, it's a guy in a suit. So Walter Cronkite was like the paragon of journalists in the 60s, 70s.
And Edward R. Murrow.
Yeah, and very well respected, and was the evening news on CBS. So when people think about like a talented, fair, straight shooting journalist, Walter Cronkite is the person that, a lot of people of our generation, maybe a little younger, would point to. So we've gone from that where people could kind of agree on these are the basic facts, and we can disagree on, tax policy here or things like that. But we all had kind of a common ground of information that we all kind of shared. There were only 3 channels on the TV plus PBS, so. But now we have, this image was circulating years ago, Pope Francis and this designer, and it didn't have by AI on it when it was out there floating around. So a lot of people initially thought this was real because it looks like it could be, and if the Pope were to wear something like that, a big puffy coat, it would be white, and he's got his plain cross, like clergy do. But that's kind of where we've come. We've come to this point where it's hard now to know not only what's true and what isn't, but what's real and what isn't even real. And part of that, I've kind of thought back over the past few decades, like, how did we get to this point? So I just wanted to talk briefly about a few of the big picture trends that I've seen and worked through in my career. And the first is the disruption of the internet. And that was largely in the 90s when more people started getting access to being able to go online. And for newspapers, 65% of newspapers' revenue, like during the 80s and early 90s, came from advertising. And a big part of that, the older people will remember, there were pages and pages of classified ads. Yard sales, people looking for jobs, people offering jobs, like people would take out these little ads and pay for them, and newspapers made a huge amount of money on those. And then something called Craigslist came out and it destroyed that part of the newspaper's business model. So the classified advertising started pretty quickly disappearing. I always thought it was funny when people said, when we would do a controversial story or something like, oh, you're just trying to sell newspapers. Well, yeah, of course, but selling newspapers wasn't how newspapers made their money. They made their money from advertising. So it was just kind of an interesting twist there. There was also, because of the internet, there was a surge of competition. People no longer had to rely on the Columbus Dispatch to get local news. If you missed the TV news that morning or that evening, you could go online and you didn't have to get a newspaper. You didn't have to read things like that. And then that led to kind of a further implosion of the news model for newspapers. So when I started at the Dispatch in 1998, we had about 250 people in the newsroom. Reporters, photographers, editors, copy editors, graphic designers, across all departments, news, sports, features. Today, there are about 40. And that's happened all across America. And that's one reason that we have fewer boots on the ground reporting kind of neutral, straight news, because there just aren't the bodies, there aren't the journalists like there used to be. And in those early days of the internet, the news organizations really faced a big choice. The Wall Street Journal decided we're going to charge for content because it's expensive to produce all of this stuff. Almost every other newspaper decided, with people on the internet saying it's the culture of free, information news wants to be free. Well, yeah, I would love to get everything for free, groceries for free, healthcare for free, So most newspapers gave away their content for years online and conditioned people to expect it to be free. So people canceled their subscriptions, they just were reading the website and getting it for free. And that became a vicious cycle that they never recovered from. Social media really began to pick up in the probably mid to late 2005, 2010, and that era when social media really picked up. And what that meant is it conditioned us to have shorter attention spans, right? We're just scrolling, looking at little nuggets here and there. But the other thing it did was before, to have something going on video, you needed a TV station and an extensive tower and equipment, and you needed an FCC license. And if you were a newspaper, you needed a big printing plant that cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and delivery drivers and all that. Everybody now with their phone is a publisher. You can upload a video and instantly somebody in Egypt can be watching that video. Or you could post something on social media, or you could put out a blog or Substack. And everyone's a publisher with this technology. And that is a radical transformation. We've seen over the past 10, 15 years in particular, a real consolidation of media. There used to be, when I started out, lots of different independent newspapers. In Scranton, the paper was owned by a family, just like it used to be here in Columbus. But those families, it became too alluring for them. They were not making as much money as they used to be making, and they could see the handwriting on the wall that the longer we stay in business, we're going to be making less and less money, so they sold to big companies. And then those big companies started merging or getting bought by venture capitalists, and their whole point was slashing and burning to squeeze out whatever profits they could, and their focus wasn't serving the communities. And the families, really, their focus was, they wanted to make money, right? It's a capitalist world here, but they also wanted to serve the communities because they lived in the communities. That was a big change, and in the past 10 or 15 years in particular, we've seen more partisanship in media, which makes it hard for people to separate the difference between news and opinion. So, for instance, the Democratic side has not been very good at this, but the Republican side has been very good at this with Fox, OAN, Newsmax, all of these, Rush Limbaugh, all these people that they created this media empire that closely aligned with Republican talking points. And the Democrats never found a way to really do that. And that has led to more distrust, because in my view, most of what is on Fox and on MSNBC is opinion. It's really not news. But people say, I saw in the news this, or Rachel Maddow that, or Sean Hannity this. That's really opinion. It's not really news, in my view. And then finally, the other big trend that's hitting now is artificial intelligence and other digital tools, like the Pope, fake picture of the Pope. It is so easy, if you're the youngest person in the room or the oldest person in the room, the technology has gotten so easy that almost anybody can make fake stuff, and it might look real. You can make fake images, you can make fake videos, you can make fake tweets. Like, 10 years ago, there was a thing that, you could sign on as someone's Twitter handle and write a tweet and do a screenshot, and it would look like that person tweeted that, and you could share it. That's only gotten worse. So it's made it tougher to know what's real, what's true, what is, because the tools have gotten so much easier. You all can be fake news producers, but you shouldn't be. I would not encourage it. So truth is harder to find now than it was even 5 years ago. So where does that leave us, and where does that leave society? So I went to the Pew Research Center, which does the best kind of data-driven surveying, extensive surveying of people on a lot of topics, including news media and things like that. And they had a report that came out just a few months ago in March, and it will not surprise anybody that they found, based on interviews, that 80% of American adults say that they cannot even agree on basic facts with other people, especially people who are in the opposing political party. 80% can't agree on what's even a fact. Like, this table is so like, well, no, maybe it isn't, or something very clear. Grass is usually green. No, we have to argue about that. In Walter Cronkite's era, in 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, we all had that common foundation of what was a fact, but now we don't. And part of it is this, is a big part of it. The other big part of it, I think, is because newspapers, and I was a print guy, so newspapers have fallen in readership over the years. And you can see, like, newspapers were kind of at their heyday during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, roughly 60, 65 million newspapers sold every day in the United States, which sounds good, but then also remember during that period, the population of the country was going up pretty significantly, and there were many, many more households in 1990 than in 1960. So staying the same was actually reaching a smaller percentage of the audience. And I will point out that this is when I left newspapers, and look what happened. Maybe I should have stayed.
Yeah, that's curse.
Exactly. It's just, and part of the reason I left newspapers is I saw what was coming and did not feel that I had another, 15 or 20 years of working in that industry. It wasn't going to be possible. It also means a lack of depth. So coupled with our short attention spans as we're doom scrolling now, I mentioned to Tom that I had, in college, there was a class that I remember taking, a journalism class, where they had taken all the words in an evening newscast. And they'd taken what Dan Rather or whoever the anchor was, every word he said, every word that the correspondents said, every word that people that were being interviewed said, all of the descriptions, every word, they took that and they typed it up and they put it into a newspaper. So how much space, how many pages do you think that fills in a newspaper? This is the audience participation.
5.
4, 5.
Ooh,
I got auction.
I know the answer. 2.
2. All right. I spoke to a high school class back at Old Tangent a few months ago, and I asked this question. They were like 20 pages, because words just seem overwhelming, right? It's got to take up a lot of space. The answer is about half a page. About half a page. And I couldn't find the textbook with the graphic that showed that. So I turned to my friend Claude, AI, that ran this, produced this, but it didn't replicate what that textbook had said. So, what you're hearing, like even if you watch a half-hour newscast, you're getting about half of one page of information. So it's just good to keep that in mind about context. We talked about smartphones. Hugh also does research down to the metro area. So I think you might be interested in the Columbus metro area, which includes the surrounding counties. Most adults, sorry, it's usually 18 and over, 30 surveys, but we'll talk about young people on the next slide. People in Columbus, they prefer to get their local news from TV, followed by news, websites, apps, radio, print, and social media. 11% of adults prefer to get their news from social media, which is reassuring in a way, but this is the part that is growing most rapidly while the others start to shrink. And they also looked at the different social media platforms. And you can see differences first by gender. So the majority of these platforms, the majority of users are men. So that would be YouTube, Twitter, I refuse to call it the other thing, and Reddit. So the big majority of people on those platforms are men. Women make up the majority users of Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So I would train journalists and say, you have to think, where is the audience you're trying to reach? If you're writing a story that you think women are interested in, probably Reddit is not where you should be posting information, because not a lot of women are there relative to men. The other big divide is on age. And if you notice, there's a big dividing line under 50, smaller under 50, bigger percentages of people are using these tools, right? It's what we know, but it's really stark that if you're over 50, like a few people are in this room, you know, TikTok, only 17% of their audience is over 50. I'm kind of surprised it's even that high. The adults will eventually ruin TikTok like everything else I've learned. It's like much grandma and get on that, it's like not cool. But my advice to you, in thinking about all of this and this changing landscape, is that you can be a fact checker. And it's kind of, I think, our Christian responsibility to help pivot away from fake wherever we encounter fake and pivot to fact wherever we can pivot to fact. And I'll give you one example. And again, you don't have to be, angry or hostile about any of this. I saw this a few months ago. It's a long post, but this started making rounds on Facebook. And a friend of mine here in town posted this. It's not this person. This person is running for Congress in Michigan. But she also posted it. And it makes reference to, it's the whole Gulf of America controversy. And this was trying to explain why President Trump wanted to change it to the Gulf of America. And there was a decision by the World Court, and it's something about sovereignty of the shells off the ocean near the shore. And this goes on and on. And this person who's running for Congress, she posted this, and then notice, disclaimer, this has not been 100% verified by me, but it makes sense. So she posted this. And a friend of mine posted this too, and I was curious, so I was looking at world court, boundaries, there's nothing out there. So I just posted a comment on my friend's post and said, can you share with me, where's this coming from? Or do you have any sources? Like I'm curious, I can't find anything. And then it made her think, she looked and she's like, well, if you're an investigative journalist and you find it, this probably isn't real. And she took it down from her page. And I've not seen her posting things that are kind of just out there, like a quick post, it makes me feel good, it reaffirms what I already believe. So I'm just gonna share it. So that's one way, sometimes a comment like that can make somebody really think. There is a site called PolitiFact, and it's coming out.
He insists we take out our phone and search for the facts.
There's a little video, but I want to set it up first. PolitiFact is run by the Poynter Institute, which is one of the premier journalism think tanks, training organizations. It's based in Florida. I've gone to training there a couple times. It's terrific. They have a whole team of people. Their whole job is to basically fact check things that are widely in the news. So if you hear something and you're like, is that real or not? You might go to PolitiFact and just check it out, or send someone there that you love. So this is kind of what it looks like. I can turn this way so you can see. So they'll give you the editor's picks at the top. You can look on different topics, big topics that people are looking at, like Jeffrey Epstein, and they'll give you their scorecard of how many of these they found that fit these criteria. And they pick things that have been shared on social media, different platforms, and they give them ratings from true to false, half true, pants on fire. This is the worst liar. And then on any of these, you can click on them and see kind of what I like about it, I think. Go in there. Oh, we'll go back. If there's something that's really kind of hot on social media and there's a lot of arguments about it, you can usually go here and find out what's real. So there was a lot of people were saying Oprah during the tsunami warning refused to let people use her private road at Hawaii. That was everywhere. Pants on fire, lie, big lie. And they have a little story. They'll give you the summary of what they have found in their review and see the sources. And then they give you everything they check to make that determination, to give you that rating. So it's a really useful site, I think, for fact checking. So let's carry on. The other thing is AI can do a lot of misinformation. information and stuff. But I think it can also be helpful. And I noticed Twitter, not this, Twitter, a couple weeks ago, they have an AI tool called Grok. And they just added a new feature that I don't think a lot of people know about. And what it is, and I'll show you, is on any tweet, there's a little Grok emblem. And if you press it, it will search their AI database and try to give you context, which I think is really cool. So here's what it looks like. The vice president posted something about crime and lawlessness in DC, and the president sending in National Guard. So there's the little Grok emblem. And when you press that, explain this post. I think other news organizations may start doing things like this with technology. And this is in real time. This is how fast the AI puts this out, puts it together. It kind of gives you an overview of what the post is talking about, a little background, some context, crime figures from DC showing crime's been going down, violent crime. This could be a distraction from the Epstein files. And then it gives you web pages that you can also just quickly get to that show you coverage on the White House site is here, the DC government site where crime stats are maintained is there, The Guardian, which is an independent news organization. The other thing is you can ask about this post. So I asked, will Trump do this in other US cities? Is this like the first thing? What do you think, Grok? What do you got? Now, you don't have to believe everything at full value, but it gives you a sense of what's possible. And this is in its early stages. It will only get more accurate, hopefully. And this brought up some really good, it's plausible. You might try this in other places. There are lots of legal and constitutional constraints, and it explains those. There's some political motivation. There could be the reaction of Congress and public, and then current crime trends. So it gives you other web pages for that as well. So it's a way, if you want to go deeper on something, you just press that button and it will give you a little more context. Try to get closer to the truth. A lot of people say, well, what news sources do you use? So I'll just share that. You can use whatever news sources you want. This is just a little chart. We do subscribe to 3 newspapers. I really like The Guardian. It's based in England. They are run by a nonprofit foundation, so there's no corporate billionaire owners or anything like that. It's not partisan in any way. It's moved in the US. There's some newsletters that I really like that once a morning you get information that gives you a quick scan, and then you can go deeper on any of those. And these are all linked if you want to check them out later. And then Substack is kind of growing. It's kind of a blogging platform that a lot of journalists and other people, experts are using. What's her name? Heather,
Yeah.
yes. She has a very popular Substack blog that you can subscribe to. Some of them are free, some of them are free with a paid version. And then I still sometimes watch the TV, the national news, but I usually yell at them. Like last night, I was like, why are they doing all this thing about a hurricane that's going to Carolina City? This isn't going to affect anyone. So I usually yell at them. Actually, the other thing that I think is the bargain of the year, like if you have an iPad or any Apple product, I love the Apple News Plus, and it's $13 a month. I have a 1-month free trial. I'm not getting a cut of this. But basically what it is, it's a bunch of newspapers and magazines that with this subscription you have full access to. So like every magazine that I can imagine, like I read Consumer Reports and a bunch of Vanity Fair and, sometimes I look at car magazines, it's just everything you can imagine, you get it for $13 a month. And then my final comment is that, just to remember that I think as Christians we have a personal responsibility to do what we can to preserve truth and to be informed and to help our friends and relatives and neighbors be informed. Because if you found one person that you helped become a little bit more discriminating in terms of information, think of what that would start to do as that multiplied and replicated. And the breaking news is basically that it really is up to each and every one of you to do that, wherever you are. And I'll end with this message from Paul's letter to the Ephesians: no more lies, no more pretense. Tell your neighbor the truth. And this is such a profound part, I think, at the end. In Christ's body, we're all connected to each other. After all, when you lie to others, you end up lying to yourself. Mm-hmm. So I've tried to think about that from my own life, like where have I lied or misinformed or skirted the truth a little bit, and I was lying to myself too, because I wanted to believe what I was sharing or saying. So I think it's really profound and challenging. And there's the link if anyone wants that, and we can have a little conversation before we go to worship or go home for you at 8 o'clock.
Thank you.